Hello class, in this video we're picking up right from the installation of Android Studio. In this case we have gotten to the part of creating a new project. But we've got a couple of decisions to make. First of all is what our application name is going to be, what our company domain is, and then of course the location that our projects will be stored. You can of course change it to be any location you want to. It's really up to you. Let's change our application name to just My First App. And what you'll notice is as you change this, your project location's name, the end part, changes accordingly. Spaces are of course removed. The next thing is our company domain. And you might be thinking, I'm just a student. I don't have a company, let alone a domain. And if that's the case, don't worry about it so much. What's important here is for us to create our own unique name. This name is used to define the package name down here, which is the exact opposite of the DNS name. So we can hear com.example. This folder that I tried to use, .this app, whatever the application's name was. So if I change this to my second app, you'll see it not only changes the package name, but it also changes the project's location, which is pretty handy, makes things easy for us. Change that back to first. But what's important here is to define something that's unique. And that's typically your full name. Like I can do George, Demetrius, Lecakes, Jr. And that's a pretty definitive name. Now I happen to own my own domain. It's georgelekakes.com. So here's something that would be hopefully unique on the App Store if I were to publish this app out there on Google Play. For this class, just use your name with a .com on the end. When you're all finished, go ahead and hit next. This is where we have to start making some important decisions, but decisions that we're, as learning students, not quite really ready to understand in too much depth. Now, we'll cover this more in the class. What we have here is the ability to select our minimum SDK, or the minimum level of support we're going to be requiring the user to have. In this case, API 15 4.0.3 ice cream sandwich is a pretty good one. Google gives you some amazing information right here so that you can determine how many devices you're targeting based upon the minimum SDK level you want to use. Now in this class, at least I'm not going to be teaching Wear, TV, Android Audio, or Glass. However, as a final project, if that's something you would like to explain to the class and go into, that's fine. But we have more than enough topics to deal with Android without getting into those subtopics. Anyway, if we were to come here and start choosing different versions, and you can notice we can go all the way back to Android. Well, you really shouldn't go to 1.0 or 1.1 unless you have a really good reason to. But we can start getting into where they started to name these things for public release, like Cupcake, Donut, Eclair, and so forth. In this class, we're going to be making sure we're always above Android API 15. Now, if you really want to make your life simple, meaning most of the bugs have been taken out and you have the latest support, choose something like 23. The problem is, if you submit your app to the store, let alone whether or not you actually have a device that's running 6.0, you can see here that only 4.7% of the devices on the Google Play Store have this. So you're targeting an incredibly small market. Better for you to try to target a much larger market by choosing something like 15 or 16. And between 15 and 16, you'll notice maybe 3 percentage points or 2 percentage points in this case. Not a huge amount of difference. But if we jump ahead to something like 5.0, notice how we have a huge drop in the number of devices that are supporting that particular platform. This is why in this class, we're still going to be supporting Android 4.0 because that is literally, at this moment, half of the market. And my intent in this class is to get you to make apps that you can actually release out there into the wild and create something interesting. So we're going to make sure we target a range of devices that's large enough to be, well, to make you money, but not so old that we're dealing with buggy stuff and old functionality that really has no realm anymore inside of Android. So for instance, yeah, if we went down to Android 1, check that out, 100% of devices. 1.1, still 100%. 3, 4, let's go to 6. Let's jump to 8. We're still at 100% of the devices. So let's go to 11. There we go, 11, 3.0 Honeycomb, which is when we started dealing with tablets and so forth. That's where stuff starts falling apart. So like I said, Android 15 is what we're going to be targeting for the most part, ice cream sandwich. Hit next. Sorry to rant a little bit there, but I wanted to make that very clear. This is a lovely screen, and this was added towards the end of the last time that I taught this class. But the idea here is Android will set up your project for you based upon which one of these you select. And it will add different activities, different XML files, different things in there to make your life easier. In our particular case, we're not here to be easy. We're here to learn something. So we're going to choose an empty activity. Take a minute though, look around and see all the different sorts of things here that are available to you. Explore this page and get a sense of what's there for you to work with, because we can always create any of these from an empty activity. It just requires more work, but that's good because it means you learned something. Let's hit next. So now we need to do two things. We need to create an activity name and we need to create an activity layout name. The activity name and the layout name, as we notice in just a few seconds, are linked. Typically, you want to name them a very similar thing. But in Android, we have conventions. And that convention first is to name your activity name. So in this case, we're just going to call this first app. If I write something like, I am amazing, what you'll notice is it took activity, put an underscore, and then took I am amazing, and then of course added underscores between those different elements, except for right here, and that's because we have two capital letters next to each other. So if I had done something like this, I'm amazing, we'll notice that that recognized a divide in letters. But if we did something like this, help me, you'll notice because it's all caps, it just creates a layout where it's all lowercase. So you can use the capitalization and lowercase of your names to help Android understand how to name things itself. So here, let's just call this my first app. And of course, it's activity underscore my underscore first underscore app. Let's hit finish. Give Android Studio a few moments to figure things out. All right, so everything's finally loaded up. We, of course, get the wonderful tip of the day, and I really do recommend you check these tips out and just don't turn it off. What are we looking at here? That's the first question. So Android Studio is not too difficult to understand. We, of course, have all of our standard Windows toolbar stuff up here for messing with different things, and we'll explore these as time goes on. But if you've used any kind of a compiler before, like Visual Studio or even MonoDevelop and so forth, we'll have a few things that we understand, things like refactoring our code, making sure that if we make changes to names and so forth, everything else changes accordingly, building our project, which is very important, running our project, and of course we have running and debugging that app. Now, what's a little bit daunting though is this next bit right here, and this I'm not going to go into really deep right now, but this actually mirrors the directory structure over here in this breakout window on the side called Project. So under Project, we have things like, let's just close this all up really fast. So we have this thing called App, and we have this thing called Gradle scripts. We'll talk about Gradle a little bit later, but anyway, we have App, and you'll notice we have our project name, My First App. Next to that, we have App, which is this folder here. Opening this up, and of course, we have things like Source. And as you can see, I can click on any of these things right here and start navigating to different areas. So if I click on Main, for instance, which is our main area over here, I can go to Res, which stands for resources, or my Java code itself. And if we open that up, you can see here we go to COM, George Lecakes. Remember that DNS, reverse DNS name we put together? That's what that is right there. And of course, down to My First App. And then we can open up this area right here. And then we have this thing called My First App. I'm going to close this and double click this now. And you'll notice it reopens it. That is what we're seeing over here. But there's two pieces here, right? There's this thing over here, C for class. That's our file. But this is our code area. This is where we're going to be writing our app. This is where we're going to be writing our activity. We can have multiple activities inside of an app. Now, what we can do as well, though, is we need to define our layout. And what you need to understand is you can define your layout in code, but the reality is a lot of times you're going to have an artist or someone else working with you or a team of individuals. And Android has made the incredibly smart decision to break apart the code side from the visual side. And we do this by creating XML files. Now, you can, if you want to, dive right down into the XML code if you'd like, but that's a giant pain in the butt. Don't do it. Android Studio has provided you with this entire interface for conveniently giving you all of these different tools that we have over here. Views and view groups is what the terms really are, and widgets that allow us to grab these things and drop them over here and see the outcome. So we've got code and we've got the visual side, the XML file. So understand that we have an area where we code, where we put in logic and so forth. Now this code side does intersect with the XML side. Right down here we have this thing called set content view r.layout.activity my first app. This thing right here is the linkage between this particular bit of code and this particular XML file we have over here. And we're going to be getting into this more later on. But what we're trying to do now is get a familiarity for the interface, the different components, and what's going on. So we have, like I said, the XML file. We have these different palette options over here. And we have things like layouts. And layouts control the flow of how widgets are placed on your screen. A widget, not only is that a name for just a generic item, it's pretty much the name for all the different graphics you see on your screen. Things from text objects, to buttons, to radio buttons. I'm not going to spell them out all here. You can read all these different options you have. An important thing to notice, though, is that based upon the version of Android you're targeting, you'll notice that we have lines drawn out through some of these different widgets, these containers, these date and time things, and that's because they're deprecated. And Android recommends you do not use these anymore. It says so right here. This item was deprecated in, let's see. This one was deprecated in 4.1. This widget is no longer supported. And then it gives you some recommendations on other things you should be doing. We also had this res folder, and this is resources. And our resources we're going to fill in with all kinds of different values. You'll notice there are things like colors, dimensions, strings, and styles. And these are ways for us to basically, there's all kinds of uses for this sort of stuff. But once again, it's a way of divorcing the code from the XML, from the actual text data that you're going to be having in your app. So one thing we're going to be talking about very shortly in a different video is localization, or making your app accessible across, the entire globe, across multiple languages. And if we take all the different strings, that is the character information, the text, and we put them in one of these XML files, what we'll find that we can do is actually create different text for every single region. The phone itself will know which region it's in. It'll know what the user has selected in terms of an interface and text and language support, and it will choose, if you supported it, the correct language for it. This would be a giant pain in the rear if we were popping everything in code. We had to encode checkout, what's going on, what language a user has set, and then load up a whole separate list of strings. By breaking things into resources, into logic, into layout, it allows us to create a better structure, create an ability to abstract what we're doing a bit, and take different pieces as if they were separate objects and link them together as we see fit. And that's going to be really important for Android. Now we have things like mipmaps, which are images. A mipmap is typically a series of different images at various resolutions. If we're talking computer graphics, which is really what I really know, there are different powers of 2s down from something like, a 2048 or 4096 texture down to 2048, down to 1024, down to 512, down to 256, down to 128, down to 64, 32, 16, 8, and then, all the way down to like a 1x1 texture. But the idea is that these are all different scaled images for different resolutions of displays, different displays with different DPI. But we have like just high, medium, extra high, extra high, and extra high DPI. And these are all, higher resolution images. We can see as we click these, they get larger and smaller for each one. So this is if you want to think about this like Visual Studio or MonoDevelop or some of those other programs out there, our project stuff is all over here on the right side, and on the left side are these different ways of viewing what's going on. And then, of course, there's more options, but really, we need to start creating our first app before we can really appreciate what's going on here. The last thing I'm going to say, though, is that we have a folder under resources called layout. And this layout contains the layout, the XML file I was mentioning before, that shows you how this object should be constructed and how it should visually look on your screen. And really, on our first app, the only things we're going to be caring about is our class file, our activity class, my first app, and then, of course, the layout file for that, which is the name of it prefaced with activity for the XML. With that, we're going to end this video. We're going to jump into our first app in the next one, which is just going to be something very simple. We're just going to throw down some widgets. We're going to get an idea of the tech side of things, what's actually going on here, and how Android is different. If you're a Java developer or a C# developer and you've been writing your own programs from the ground up, you might be saying, where's our main? Where's our main point of entry? Where the heck is this stuff? You don't get it here. You're basically at the whim of the operating system. And anyway, I'm going to go too far in this video. Let's stop there, and we're going to get into all that kind of interesting stuff in the following subsequent video. Thanks everyone. See you next time. Bye.